So there are agreed guidelines globally, and they focus on breastfeeding and the introduction and provision of adequate complementary feeding practices. With breastfeeding, the key ones are the initiation of breastfeeding within the first hour, which is an important pillar, followed by exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months and continued breastfeeding through the age of 2. In terms of complementary feeding, there are various aspects because breast milk is not adequate to provide nutrient requirements after 6 months. Ensuring adequate a minimum dietary diversity, which is 4 or more of the common food groups, frequency of feeding. These are combined as a minimal adequate diet. There's also the timing of introduction, timely introduction of complementary foods after 6 months of age. So those are some core indicators that are used, and safe food. So the transition to what's stable food or family food, there is some variability depending on the development of the child. But typically, most children by the age of 2 should have transitioned to eating what's family food. Some children may accomplish it a little earlier, but it's often happening in the second year of life. The consistency has to be modified for children 6 to 18 months typically. And as they get used to eating, firmer foods, they would be able to handle a family diet by age 2. The diet diversity in many settings can be low even at the household level, and so the choices that then the child gets are often limited. So it's a combination. The challenges could be a combination of the food that's available that the household consumes if they're very poor and they basically have a very inadequate diet in terms of diversity. The other challenge is also feeding practices. Even when foods, micronutrient-rich foods are available, typically it's for the micronutrients like iron, some of the vitamins. Mothers or caregivers may not give certain types of food thinking that the child can't digest it, etc. And so even if the food's available, they're not offered, and the micronutrient intakes can be inadequate. Yeah, in settings, especially when the availability of micronutrient-rich foods, particularly with nutrients like iron, zinc, vitamin A, these tend to be more bioavailable in animal source foods, which may not be fed to children or are not available. There is the potential of either fortified foods or home-based fortification, where the mother still has it's a low-cost approach, but she's able to improve the micronutrient quality of commonly consumed foods that tend to just have energy and some protein. Uh, there's a lot of work to suggest that's not beneficial. In the short term, perhaps the child will consume some more food, but there have been studies that have clearly shown the advantages of responsive feeding, where parents are more sensitive to the cues from the children, so they don't feed them only when they are hungry. They're not using food as a transaction. Often, both in underweight and overweight, if parents force food or use food as a prize, then that has behavioral issues and puts the children at increased risk of eating disorders and poor health later on. I would characterize responsive feeding as being attentive to the child in the feeding, in the act of feeding. So when you're feeding a child, you are perceptive to the child's reaction, and you adapt the way you offer the food to that child, and making it an enjoyable experience. I think organic means different things to different people. There are real concerns about contamination, the use of pesticides, which often one is, it's not obvious from the food source. So that doesn't mean that organic food is free of contamination. So I have mixed opinions about it. I think it's an individual choice, and parents use what's appropriate for their, balancing. The primary objective should be that the child meets his or her nutritional needs with minimizing harm.